And in addition to being a forerunner and a front runner of queer clergy long before it became a thing, but now I most only know queer clergy at this point. I don't even think I know any straight clergy at this point, which is pretty good.
Well.
It's pretty good, yeah, it's pretty good. But it's also just a wise woman, a wise grandmother, who I also can't believe that. That always seems striking to me as well. And when I started thinking about who were the kind of people I wanted to have to talk about the nature of peace in 2019, Tara was one of the very first people that came to mind. So because I am hoarse, I'm not going to talk too long, but I love you. Jenna, I love you as well. I think we'll be hearing more from Jenna before the night is over, but I'm going to hand it over to you, and welcome to Peace House. Warm round of applause for Reverend Tara Wilkins.
Y'all will probably be able to hear me okay. Generally, projection is not a problem I have. Well, thanks for coming out tonight on a beautiful Friday night. I always feel like in Portland we're competing with the weather when we get together.
Yeah.
So let's take a holy deep breath in as we're all sitting here together and notice the people around you. The format for tonight is I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to ask a couple questions for you to share with your neighbors, and we'll do that for several segments, and then at the end we can have a big old conversation. How about that? The first time I saw myself on television, it said Reverend Tara Wilkins, Christian activist. And I had never seen that word activist attached to my name before. And I couldn't tell in that moment whether that was a good idea or not. Mm-hmm. And I had to wrestle with, am I an activist that happens to be a pastor? Or am I a pastor who happens to be an activist? Mm-hmm. Because in the circles that I was in, it was real easy for them to see, shall we say, my presentation as the big dyke activist and not take me seriously for my spiritual wisdom or expression or how I move through the world. And so it took me a while to kind of figure out what identity I could claim authentically, and I claim both, but I am pastor first and activist second, because all being an activist is articulating your faith in the world, which is part of the Christian call. So I thought I'd start out a little bit by talking about faith formation. We don't get involved in this work just because, generally. And I didn't get involved in this work just for political reasons, though if you know me, you might be surprised by that. My first experiences of God were when I was a child in my grandmother's house, where she had this maple tree in the backyard. Maybe some of you had a tree in your childhood. And I would go, and I remember when I was old enough to finally climb up into the limbs where I could sit, and just the peace that I experienced there were my first experiences of really experiencing God. Now, my parents were both Episcopalian. They were divorced, and church was sort of, I always knew it was something important to them, but they didn't exactly model it. So I didn't have lengthy Bible discussions or even experiences really much at Christmas and Easter. Once in a while we would go, and they'd make me wear a dress, and I had to have those white shoes with the little, the little purse that matches, and it was awful. It was kind of torturous, actually. But then as a young adult, after I had a couple of children, I had this sense that they needed some kind of spiritual formation. And I had been baptized in the Presbyterian Church, so I took them to the Presbyterian Church. And I loved the sense of the sacred and the formality of the worship and the way that you could just feel something else there. I didn't have I wasn't sure exactly how to reconcile my theology with some of my earlier experiences, but I just had this sense of the holy. Because when I was 8, 9, or 10, there was a green school bus that used to come around the neighborhood. Now, I grew up with a single mom who was a waitress and who worked on Saturday nights, so getting up on Sunday morning was not her thing. And if there was a school bus that was going to come and collect the children in the neighborhood and entertain me for a few hours, she was all for that. So I went to this hail, fire, and brimstone kind of church. You know, the kind where the pastor pounds the pulpit and gets red and you can see the veins in his neck. But at that church, they taught me something really important. They taught me to pray. Now, I don't pray for the ticket to heaven that church taught about. I don't have that theology of heaven and hell anymore. But what I learned in that experience was that God was accessible to me in the moment. That I didn't need a church or a minister to intercess for me. That I had direct access. And that fact carried me through a very tumultuous adolescence and into my early experiences in the church. So as I got more active in the church, again, I didn't have a really well-formed theology, or I wasn't super articulate about God.